And welcome to the Nitro College Football Show. College football from a Georgia point of view. I'm Burl.
And I'm Streit.
And today we are talking the college football playoff national championship game between number 8 Ohio State and number 7 Notre Dame. And we have a new national champion as the Ohio State Buckeyes defeat Notre Dame 34-23 and are your champions of college football for 2024. So turned out to be pretty entertaining game. When going into it, I had kind of low expectations. Was just kind of thinking Ohio State's gonna dump truck Notre Dame, but that first drive, Notre Dame came out swinging, made it seem like it was gonna be a pretty big dogfight, and then Ohio State turns around and they look like they're about to run away with it. But then the Fighting Irish turn it back around and live up to their name and fought back and actually got within 8 near the end and chance to win the game. So I was sweating there for a minute, because we all picked Ohio State. Didn't want to miss on that one.
Yeah, I think this game played out a lot exactly how we thought it was going to. The Ohio State talent obviously won out in the end, but early on, Notre Dame came out on that first drive, a 10-minute drive to open the game, 18 plays. And it was what we kind of said. We said if Notre Dame stood a chance in this game, a couple things were going to have to happen. One was they were going to have to control the clock, keep Ohio State off the field. And that opening drive, it certainly looked like they were going to try to do that. But what it turned out to be is that the only time in the game when they actually could run the ball. One of the major things for Notre Dame all season has been this running attack, and it was non-existent in this game. On the first drive, Riley Leonard had a couple of nice runs, including a run where he scored there at the end, but he looked gassed. And based on the reports, it said that he went over to the sidelines right after he scored that touchdown and puked all over the place. So he certainly was. But after that opening drive, Notre Dame just couldn't run the ball at all. I mean, they hardly even tried. I think Riley Leonard had 17 carries in the game, but when you only give 7 carries to Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love, I don't know if Love was still hurt. The lingering knee issues was a problem, but they really didn't try to establish it at all on the ground. And yeah, I think that put them at a disadvantage to what they wanted to do in the game.
Right. Ohio State took away the thing that they do best, right? And as a defense, that's usually, the MO. And if you can pull it off, you are probably going to win. But yeah, that first drive was super impressive. I mean, they just marched down, moved the Notre Dame defensive line. And, I was thinking, man, Riley Leonard was getting beat up on that drive. And I think I texted you this, that, if they keep running Riley Leonard, he's going to get hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Just like he got hurt and banged up there in the Penn State game. I thought for sure if they kept him going at that pace, he was gonna be dead. And I mean, shoot, he was puking on the sideline. He was certainly fatigued a little bit after that. But with no help from the rest of his rushing attack, a lot of the game kind of fell on him.
Yeah, and he delivered. He did his part, rushing, and he had a good night throwing the ball. But if you don't have a running game, it's hard to win.
Yeah. Well, and when you're playing a team like Ohio State, especially, after that opening touchdown drive, Ohio State went right down the field, and it looked easy. Whereas Notre Dame's 18-play drive was very methodical. Quarterback runs, getting to third downs, converting. The Ohio State drive to open the game was all too easy, highlighted by that little touchdown pass to Jeremiah Smith. And Notre Dame got the ball back, and they could do nothing. As a matter of fact, over their next 4 drives, they had a grand total of 11 yards. And that is when Ohio State just opened up a can of whoop ass on them there for the next 2.5 quarters, pretty much.
Yeah, it did seem like Ohio State was going to run away with it. And props to Ohio State. They did exactly what we said they needed to do. Keep Will Howard clean. And when they did that, he was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah. Will Howard started the game 11 of 11. And I think I tweeted out that maybe old Grayson Lambert was getting a little bit nervous about his NCAA record for pass completion in the game. But ultimately, I think, Will Howard had 4 or 5 incompletions. So Grayson Lambert, you're safe at least for one more day. But yeah, Howard had a great game, and Judkins had a great game. He had 3 touchdowns. He broke off a long 70-yard run, but he looked like he was out of gas because it looked like he was in the clear and 3 guys ran him down, and he looked tired.
Oh, he got ran down.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised with that because I thought he was, a little bit more of a burner. But he had 3 touchdowns in the game, 2 rushing, one receiving. So a good game for the money they spent to bring him in from Ole Miss.
Yeah, that was a very impressive performance by him. It was an impressive performance by that Ohio State offensive line. Notre Dame's front 7 had no answers. They couldn't stop the run. They definitely couldn't get to the quarterback. Just wasn't the same performance that we've seen them have throughout the rest of the playoff.
Yeah, they certainly didn't push Ohio State's offensive line around like they did Georgia's. That's for sure. But, Ohio State was kind of running away with the game, and for all intents and purposes, I thought it was over. And then Notre Dame had that little comeback in the second half. Jaden Greathouse, man, what a game that guy had. He made a couple of phenomenal catches. He had both their touchdown catches, including one where he made Caleb Downs miss a tackle, which is not something you see very often this season for arguably one of the best defensive players in all of college football. But Notre Dame did have something very questionable happen toward the end of this game. They had scored a touchdown, got a 2. They were within 16, and they drove down to the Ohio State 9-yard line, I think, and it was a 4th down with about 9 minutes to go, and they made the decision to kick a field goal. And this was not a good decision. I don't know if, these newer coaches are so married to those metric sheets like Kirby, going for 2 in that one game. But man, it was a bad decision. And Mitch Jeter choked. So all those good things I said about Mitch Jeter the last few weeks, forget all that. The guy choked when it mattered most, and he missed a chippy.
Yeah, that call was a bit of a head scratcher. I think it threw everybody off just with where it was at the moment in the game. But I guess he was thinking, okay, I'm going to try to take points and trust my defense. And, as the game played out, honestly, he was almost right. Yeah, if he actually made that field goal, then that last touchdown drive that they were trying to get, that would have won the game.
Yeah, I mean, it was, like I said, I think it's just it's a weird decision. You all season long, they were kind of aggressive. They went for it on 4th down early in the game. They went for a fake punt that failed in this game. So they'd played aggressive a lot throughout the game, but then when the decision was you're down 16, you've got to the 9 because Ohio State fumbled, which was their only turnover in the whole game. Feels like you kind of got to try to take advantage of that. It's the national championship game. What do you have to lose? But they didn't. And, hindsight's 2020, could look back and say, yeah, they maybe should have went for it, but they didn't. And they still weren't dead at that point, though. Notre Dame got another touchdown at a Greathouse, and they got the 2 again. They ran a little trick play that was kind of sweet to get the 2.
They just wouldn't die.
But then, Ohio State had a drive. They were moving the ball a little bit, and then it was a 3rd down. And another kind of questionable coaching decision, I think, on 3rd down and long, after 2 Will Howard runs, which were not good play calls, in my opinion. They sit the house on 3rd down and left a guy one-on-one with Jeremiah Smith, which was not good. Jeremiah Smith made a huge catch, and Ohio State kicked a field goal, and ultimately they won the game, 34-23.
Yeah, you can't leave Jeremiah Smith wide open or one-on-one at any point in time. He's too good. You've got to get double team, bracket him, whatever it takes. Because I don't think there is a corner out in college football right now that can cover him at all.
No, I don't think there is. And I mean, even the guy that was on him on that play, Garcia, he was the guy who made the interception the week before versus Penn State. But it was just too much to cover that guy one-on-one. And, Chip Kelly saw it, and I think somebody even said that they kind of baited them into the formation they'd ran out of already. It was just it was a good play call, and they got the coverage they wanted, and you had the right guy out there. So Ohio State wins their second national championship in the college football playoff era. Of course, they won the first college football playoff back when the 14 playoff started in 2014. And here we are, the first year of the 12-team playoff, and Ohio State is your champion once again.
Yeah. Congrats to Ohio State. A lot of happy Buckeyes out there. There were a absolute ton of Ohio State fans in Atlanta yesterday. I mean, that stadium was probably 70-30. I know my father-in-law was there. He ran into Archie Griffin and got a picture with him. So that was pretty cool. And it was funny because I was walking with Jess and she asked me, "Oh, is he good?" I said, he's the only 2-time Heisman winner. Yeah, I think he's okay.
He's pretty good.
She's like, "Oh."
Yeah, I saw that the airport was a total wreck this morning. Like, I guess the combination of Martin Luther King Day and the national championship and lots of people flying out, the airport was just a total wreck this morning with people leaving. So,
Yep. So, again, congrats to Ohio State. So, I think Ohio State ended up finishing the season the way everybody thought that they were going to play throughout the season. But they had a few places where they tripped up, and they were able to take advantage of the new 12-team format, because in any other format they're out, and Ryan Day is probably out of a job. Yeah. So congrats to them.
Talent won out at the end. It took that loss to Michigan to kind of kick them in the tail and realize that they just needed to go out there and play. I think this Ohio State team had some similarities to the Georgia team in 2021 that lost the SEC championship game to Alabama, because they tried to do some different things schematically with that dominant defense. And when they played Alabama again in that national championship game, they kind of scrapped it and just went back and let those defensive players that were uber talented play. And they shut Alabama down for most of the game. And I think you saw that a little bit with Ohio State here. When they played Michigan, they tried to match Michigan's physicality and run the ball. And, Notre Dame's kind of similar in that vein. And here they just let their talent go out there and play. They took advantage of their receivers, their playmakers that they brought in, and just overpowered a team that just at the end of the day didn't have quite as much talent as they did.
Absolutely. So final rankings come out. Before we dive into that, I want to thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Hit that like button, drop some comments, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and share it with your friends. Hit the notify bell. Really helps the channel, really helps us grow, and allows us to keep doing this.
Yeah, and if you're listening to the audio version, please leave us a review and like the episode and tell us what you think of the show. It also helps us improve the quality of the show, just seeing how we sound and what people think.
Okay. Final rankings came out, the AP and the coaches poll. Of course, Ohio State's number 1, Notre Dame number 2. That makes total sense. But 3 through 6 is a little sus.
Yeah, just a little bit. I don't know if this is the old case of they just looked at how people finished in the playoff and said, "Oh, well, that's how we're going to rank them." But there are definitely some real head scratchers here. Let's start with Texas. So Texas finishes at number 4 in the AP rankings and number 3 in the coaches poll. So number 1, Texas shouldn't have been ahead in Oregon. Oregon went undefeated, won their conference, beat Ohio State in the regular season, who ended up winning the national championship. Oregon absolutely should have been number 3 in this final poll. Texas has no visit.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, I don't understand how anybody could rank Texas above Oregon. And, we're getting to it, but Georgia beat them twice.
Right. And so that's the next one we're going to talk about. So we had Penn State at 5 in both the polls, but then you've got Georgia at 6. And lots of people online have said, how many times does Georgia have to beat Texas to be ranked ahead of them? And it's not only that. Georgia beat Texas twice. Georgia and Texas both had 3 losses on the season. Georgia was a conference champion. Texas was not. So
neither was Penn State.
Neither was Penn State. And that's also a little confusing there. But at least the argument could be that, Penn State's losses were to Ohio State and Notre Dame, two teams that played in the national championship, and Oregon. So all three teams that ranked ahead of them. But for Texas, them being ranked ahead of Georgia is just dumb. And yes, rankings in the end don't mean much, but it's just hard to know, like, in this new realm of the college football playoff, are they really taking how you finish in the playoff that much more over the results that you show on the field in terms of your rankings? It seems really dumb to me.
Yeah, I agree. So Nitro Show official final rankings. I think we go Ohio State, Notre Dame, Oregon, Penn State, Georgia, then Texas.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Now, after that, the rankings are pretty good. You've got Arizona State at 7, Tennessee, Boise State kind of, flip-flop, and then Indiana and so on. So I think after that, I think they're pretty good. But touching on Georgia a little bit more, Georgia finished 6th in the polls, and they finished inside the top 7 for the 8th consecutive season. Every year under Kirby Smart, except for his first year in Athens, they've been ranked inside of the top 7. And they've also been ranked in the final rankings for the 23rd time in the last 28 seasons.
Yeah.
So people who say that Georgia's not a top echelon program or whatever, I mean, the proof is there. Like,
oh, absolutely.
Sustained success throughout this entire century. They'll have this since we became the 2000s.
Yeah, and the narrative right now is that Georgia had this really bad year. Like, oh, it was a down year. Yeah, Georgia didn't win the national title. If that's, your standard of a good year versus a bad year, then I'll take that any day. I call BS on that narrative. Georgia won the SEC, made the playoff, and you know who didn't? Bama, Michigan, a lot of others. They would have loved to be in Georgia's position and have a good season. Michigan's probably just like, oh, we had a good season because we beat Ohio State. Congrats. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah. And they did beat Ohio State. And for Ohio State, they've obviously won the national title. They will finish in the top 5 for the 14th time in the last 17 years. And so, you've got Georgia on this period where they've been pretty dominant. Ohio State is clearly always one of those dominant teams. But there is one team that we're used to seeing out there that kind of fell off this year. Alabama finished at 17 in both polls. Now, for the record, Alabama at 9-4 finished 17. I think anybody else at 9-4 would have probably been about 23 or 24. But because they're Alabama, they still get that bump, the Bama bump. But they finished at 17, and that is the first time that Alabama has finished outside the top 8 since 2010.
Oh, the legacy of Nick Saban.
Yep.
You can see, it seemed like, I was talking about this with someone the other day, that at the beginning of the season, Bama was still Bama because, they still had like the last vestiges of Nick Saban rolling into the season. And then it just slowly wore off with each game. And it's like they used up all their Nick Saban powers against Georgia because obviously they lost to Vandy the next week.
Right.
And just had a weird rest of the season after that.
Yeah. I mean, as the season went on, it became clear that this Bama team was not the Nick Saban standard Bama team. It just wasn't. They were undisciplined like you hadn't seen. They made mistakes. They had just things that you didn't see in our Nick Saban team. So definitely a down year for Bama.
And really, honestly, it's unacceptable. Looking at the Bud Elliott blue chip ratio thing, the number 2 most talented team in America. They're right behind Ohio State, but obviously had completely different seasons.
Right. They did. Ohio State put it all together at the end when they needed to, and Bama never quite did. And just think if from a Bama perspective, if they would have showed up and beaten a bad Oklahoma team, they would have been in the playoff, but they didn't. Even with the problems that they had. So back to your point that people say that Georgia had a bad year because we won the SEC and we're in the playoff. Look at Alabama. There's an example of a team that wasn't having as good of a year as the standard they had, but they couldn't get it together.
Yeah.
So,
And like I said earlier, most fans would dream of having a season like Georgia did. See
yeah.
Indiana.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I was going to talk about Indiana as one of those teams that finished ranked 10th in both polls. And it's only the second time they finished ranked since 1988. And it's only the eighth time that they finished ranked in almost 120 something years of playing football.
Wow.
So it's really, historically, when you look at it, and you talk about Kurt Signetti coming in, and yes, he brought these players, and a lot was made that their schedule wasn't that tough, and they kind of got beat pretty bad in the playoff. But man, it was quite a turnaround for that team and that program from their history as the losingest program in the major conferences. Going 11-1, making the playoffs was just a fantastic year for them.
Yeah, and it was fun to watch them keep winning as the year went on, even, with the schedule thing. I mean, they still beat Michigan. That's a big deal.
And Washington.
And Washington, the two teams that played in last year's national championship.
Absolutely. Another team that we saw kind of find itself again after, a long period of not having success was SMU. They finished ranked for the second consecutive season, which is great. They finished ranked last year as well. But before that, it had been 34 years since they'd gotten the death penalty. It took them getting their program essentially killed. It took 34 years to them to even get ranked again. Last year, I think they finished ranked around 20th. And then this year, obviously, they made the playoff and they finished up. At 12. So
it took legalizing everything that they did in the 80s for them to come back.
Right. So they've come a long way. And then the last team I wanted to point out in the rankings that I thought was another great story was we talked about them a lot this year. Army, they won their conference and they finished number 22 in the country. That's only the third time that they've been ranked since 1958. And keep in mind that up until then, they were a dominant program because Army and Navy, they were dominant programs in college
football. All the service academies were, and Yale was.
Right. So now in the almost 70 years since, this is only the third time that they've been ranked at the end of the year.
Yeah, great story. So happy for Army. It was fun to watch them, even though they took the L in the Army-Navy game. Still a great season for them.
This was the end of the first 12-team playoff, obviously, and it was different, this year. What are your overall thoughts just on the expanded playoff format and how the games went and how everything turned out?
It's kind of a mixed bag. I have no problem with it being 12 teams. I just think the execution of how they put the playoff together didn't meet expectations. Right. The best part of all of the playoffs was the on-campus first round. That was absolutely far and away the best part of the playoffs. Having most of the games, as bowl games, I understand why they want to do that, but it's not good for the fans. And honestly, it's not good for television because you're asking fans to travel a lot if they're going to go. Like, if you got to go to New Orleans and then you got to go maybe to California or Miami. I mean, that's a lot of travel, for games like that. And you saw it on TV. There was a lot of empty seats in a lot of these games, and you would have never seen that in the BCS era. Or even the 14 playoff, I mean, that was kind of a downer, for me. But overall, I like the 12-team playoff. I do wish it would go down to 8. I think 8 would have been perfect, but it just that's never going to happen now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think this first year had some ups and downs. On campus games were awesome. It was great to see that type of atmosphere. I think the mistake, like you said, is having those quarterfinal games and bowl games. I think one thing they need to immediately try to address is to get those quarterfinal games also on campus. Give those teams that won their conference championships or who are the top ranked teams that get the bye, give them something about having that bye. Not only do they get a bye, but also they get a home playoff game and build the momentum with their team and their fans. I think that's good. I think the scheduling overall kind of sucked, to be honest with you. You had periods of long waits and then short waits and then long waits, and it really, really made it feel like you didn't always know what the next game was. And one thing that I've seen, the sentiment that I see all over the place this last week, and I kind of felt the same thing, was I wasn't that excited for this national championship game. And not just because Georgia wasn't in it. I'm normally excited. I love college football and I love watching the championship game. I just wasn't feeling it. And I saw that online too. A lot of people were like, I just don't care. And I think the term that's been thrown out, and somebody said this, and I really think it's true, just felt college football fatigue. So many games, so much to follow, such a weird schedule, games all over the place. It just, by the end, I was just kind of tired. The game's going on. You have the NFL, which usually takes over this time of year, and you're trying to have these games scheduled around them to not interfere. And then the game being on a Monday night after you had NFL playoff games on Friday or on Saturday and Sunday, it just kind of, I don't know, it just took the sales out of it. So long term, I think they need to fix it. I know the NFL has said that they're willing to work with college football on their scheduling. They need to get the college football national championship game on Saturday. Saturday is the day that college football is played. They need the national championship game to be played on Saturday. And they need to work out a way that the NFL gives them that day. NFL can still have playoff games early in the day, make the game at night. But this Monday night stuff, after all of that, just to me didn't work.
Yeah, hopefully they fix the scheduling. Really just have it later. Just push it later. There's a week between the conference champion or division championship games. No, not division. Yeah, conference championship games and the NFL. Both, and then you got a week off and then the Super Bowl. So I know you've said this before. That would be the perfect time to play the national championship.
Yeah.
And either that the rest.
Yeah, either that or, and I know somebody, Feinbaum said it, and people didn't like that he said it, but the Army-Navy game, as much as we love the Army-Navy game, that is a wasted weekend.
Absolutely. Someone had a good idea. They should just play that first week of the season.
They should play that. That should be week 0. That should be the only game week 0. That's how the season should start. That would be awesome. My solution. And then what you do is, because instead of, giving advantage to these teams that don't have to play in their conference championship games to get these nice long breaks with no pressure until their first home playoff game or whatever, have them have to go out and play right after the conference championship game. Gives them advantage to that team that won the conference championship that they don't have to play next week. In the NFL, you don't get a week off until you're in the Super Bowl. So align it that way and move that front end up. And keep it consistent. Play every weekend. Keep the games on Saturday and play them every weekend and keep the season running. And then, heck, you know what? That might help you fix the problem with the portal and with signing day. Because one of the things about the portal is they want the kids to be able to be enrolled for spring semester to their new schools. Well, if you've got the season ending before, the first week in January, which is when the national championship game used to be, then guys could still go in the portal and transfer. They wouldn't have to transfer and go in the portal on their teams if they're still playing in the playoff because they're worried about not being able to transfer.
Yeah. We're going to have a whole show about how we're going to fix college football. We've got the pencil or the pen, and we're going to fix all of college football's problems.
Yeah. So just kind of, wrapping up, a couple of quick thoughts just on the 2024 season as a whole. My biggest term for this season is this was a seismic shift in the game of college football. And I say that for a few main reasons. Number one, Nick Saban is gone. The person who was the figurehead who kind of ruled over college football for the last 20 years. is gone. And that was felt. Alabama fell off. New coaches are rising. Number two, NIL and transfers are just running wild. There's no rules, and it's off to the races. It's tampering. It's guys changing hands. It's, nobody being loyal. It's guys being great, and then all of a sudden, going to the portal. It's guys declaring for the draft and then getting a $10 million offer to go back to school. It's nuts. There needs to be some regulation, but that's the game we're playing in. Number three, I think, was that part of the transfer portal landscape in NIL is that we have seen the depletion of depth charts, particularly at a lot of our bigger schools that traditionally have, one of the advantages has been able to recruit good and keep good players to be backups. If guys aren't starting now, they're taking money and transferring. And you saw that Georgia was certainly not as deep as they've been in the past. Alabama was not as deep as they've been in the past. Michigan was not as deep as they've been in the past. And so I think that's a definite change that teams like Ohio State, who still develop players like the good programs do, but then also went and bought a bunch of guys, they had depth. That's just a change, and that often results in a lot of upsets and things like that. And then the last thing that I've really seen that kind of hurts my heart a little bit was the devaluement of the regular season and the conference championship games to a lesser extent. Some people are like, oh yes, they still meant so much because these games eliminated people from the playoff. Yeah, from the 12-team playoff, where you got to the playoff and the games were still mostly blowouts. You got to the playoff where the teams that were the top teams, that were the top seeds, got knocked out. So yeah, Ohio State, great year, won a national championship, but they still lost to Michigan for the fourth year in a row as a double-digit favorite over a 6-5 Michigan team.
Yeah, Ohio State is definitely the biggest winner of this new playoff format. They're the biggest beneficiary, and congrats to them. They won it all in the system that's in place. I don't necessarily think it was a bad thing that they won, even though in the old systems they wouldn't have made it, because Georgia had a similar situation back when the 14 playoff was fairly new. Georgia had lost to Auburn and then turned around and played them again in the SEC championship, and then went on to play for the Natty in a game I don't want to talk about ever. But yeah, it was a similar situation, and yeah, it was. I thought it was a really, really fun season. Honestly, with the conference expansion, we got to see a lot of games that we would have never seen during the regular season. The things that would have only happened in bowl games, and so that was probably like the best thing that I could see with how everything changed this season. And then, like you said, devaluing of the regular season, yeah, to a certain extent, yeah. So there were a lot more teams still involved at the end of the season, which was fun to see. But the conference championships, they really didn't mean crap, and that sucked. I'd rather just not have a conference championship game if you're going to have a 12-team playoff. It needs to be structured where you shouldn't have to have rankings to figure out who gets in the playoff. With the conferences expanding the way they are, there's really no reason for it. And hopefully it gets corrected at some point. And one thing that I read this week that was really interesting was the ACC. They're saying that, they're not even going to let their regular season champ play in their conference game. Although in the end, losing your conference championship game didn't impact you. It didn't hurt you the way it did Georgia last year, losing the conference championship and getting left out. That's one thing that the committee, I think, got right, was they said, okay, whatever their final ranking is, that's it. If you're playing your conference championship, it's not going to impact your body of work that you've already done. So I appreciated that.
I think the results in the playoff this year are going to skew that next year, though. Next year, I think the argument is we need to have the best teams, because you saw the blowouts in that first round. I think next year, and because Ohio State ultimately won with this team that kind of everybody thought was that talented, I think that's going to shift the mindset of the committee next year. I don't think they're going to stick to that. Oh, you lost in your conference championship, but you should still be rewarded. I think if the scenario is the same as this year, next year, and it was Bama, SMU in the exact same scenario, Bama is in. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, the last thing, or another thing, everybody, is talking right now because there wasn't an SEC team in the championship game. So sky's falling. The SEC's dead. I don't know what they're going to do. Now that everybody can pay their players, the playing field has been leveled. Give me a break. Do this over a decade, like the SEC did, and then we'll say that the SEC's dead. You got to do it more than 2 years of an SEC team not winning the championship. It can't just be like, oh, well, they didn't make it. No, we're pretty damn close, and there's still a lot of good football teams in the SEC and a lot of good players. Is there more talent throughout the rest of college football and a leveler playing field? Absolutely. But you still saw the big teams in the end playing for the championship. You saw the Blue Bloods. I mean, Ohio State, Notre Dame. I mean, these are like two institutional teams of college football.
Right. I think that at the end of the day, the 12-team playoff and the shift and everything in terms of how it's structured has really made college football a lot more like NFL light. And for the NFL, for years, it's not always the team that finishes first place that wins the Super Bowl or makes it. I mean, Tom Brady's undefeated New England Patriots lost the Super Bowl to a Giants team that, had to play on Wild Card Weekend. And you used to not see that type of upset happen. But when you have the number 8 seed and the number 7 seed playing for the national champion, and none of the conference champions and none of the teams with the byes were even in the Final Four, then you've definitely impacted what the regular season means and how it structures your playoff system. So I know I sounded kind of negative there. I talked a lot about the negatives of the 2024 season, but there were definitely some positives in this season. I will say that this era we're living in with transfers and with mercenary teams and with guys who change hands all the time, it does give you a little bit more unpredictability. You'll have a team that Ole Miss that goes out and beats Georgia and looks unbeatable, and then they go out and they lose to Florida. Or you have a team like Alabama who wins this exciting game and, has this star 17-year-old athlete, and then they lose to Vanderbilt, and then they get knocked off by a bad Oklahoma team. This season was a season of chaos, probably the most chaotic season that we've had since 2007. So it definitely was a fun year, and I'm looking forward to next year because I think you can't take every season as it is. This year coming in, everybody kind of knew Ohio State was going to be that program. They were going to have this talent. You kind of thought Texas and Georgia were going to be there, and all those teams were there in the end. But who would have said before the year that you were going to have Indiana and SMU and Boise State in the playoff? I'd have thought you were crazy. So I appreciate this season for the chaos that it created, and I'm looking forward to next year.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. It was a very chaotic season. A lot of good, memorable moments throughout the year. Just being able to see those games with conference expansion, that was great. Renewed rivalries. So we got to see Texas A&M again. The first time they played since A&M joined the SEC.
Well, you definitely saw some conference rivalries that you never saw before because you saw Oregon playing teams in the Big Ten, and you got to see some games from the playoff before. Some rematches from last year. You got to see Texas play Michigan. You got to see Washington and Michigan play in the regular season. And you got to see Alabama and Michigan play in a bowl game. So all the playoffs from last year were replayed in the regular season this year. And you're going to kick it off next year with a really, really good slate of games to start the year next year. So
yeah, and we saw some crazy upsets. Vandy beating Bama, no one saw that coming, and Michigan beating Ohio State. The only people in Michigan saw that coming, and even Ole Miss losing to Florida. I mean, that was a big upset.
Or Ole Miss losing to Kentucky.
Or Ole Miss losing to Kentucky, absolutely.
So, Burl, that kind of wraps up our coverage of the 2024 season. In season, what is next for the Nitro Show in the off season?
Oh, we got a lot of stuff planned for y'all. We're going to continue to do weekly shows. We're going to keep producing content in short form, long form, all that good stuff. We're going to continue to cover the whatever news pops up. There's always going to be a lot of transfer portal stuff, spring practices, spring games, all that type of stuff. What else are we going to cover?
So starting next week, we're going to be going through every school in the Power 4 conferences and Notre Dame and giving them a grade on how we felt they did during the 2024 season. We'll start with the SEC next week and move conference by conference over the next couple of weeks. It should be fun. And it's going to be a great off season. So look forward to a lot more content from the Nitro Show. And as we wrap up, once again, we appreciate everyone who listens to the show, who gives us a like and gives us a subscribe. Until next time, go Dogs.
Go Dogs.